Hello, and welcome back to Heavy Hands. I'm Connor, that's Phil.
Hello.
And we are so glad to be back with you this week after being prevented by, well, God himself, really, from recording last week. Phil, have you committed any punishable sins recently that you can attribute that to?
Well, I am noticing you did seem to manage to make time for recording with Zane. So your tech problems had mysteriously resolved themselves by the time it was your important podcast.
I would never, even though he's not listening and doesn't listen to this, and we'll never find out.
He's got better things to do with his time, let's be honest.
I do want to put it out there that is not the important podcast. Not even close. This one is. It's Heavy Hands. We're back. Computer issues have been resolved. And we missed a lot of shit in the intervening weeks, it has to be said. Probably we will take a little time to just dip our toes in the event that we didn't have time to recap and the one that we had neither time to preview, nor will we have time to recap it this week, because UFC 317 is on the horizon. Ilia Topuria moving up to the lightweight division, vacating his belt, now finds the lightweight belt also vacant. He's taking on Charles Oliveira for the strap that Islam Makhachev recently gave up so that he can go up to welterweight to fight Jack Della Maddalena. Basically, the UFC machine is functioning as intended. Smooth, you know? Stories very easy to follow, no grease required on these wheels. This is how title fights are supposed to come about. In fact, you pointed out, Phil, they really have like their only current star, arguably, and their two brightest prospects all on this one main card.
Yeah, this really is the UFC saying, look, we have a future. Look, we've got three young guys, and they're all here. Yeah. They're all on this card, which does, on the one hand, means that it's a great card with, young and exciting talent and so on.
Yep.
It also means that it's quite heavily freighted.
Mm-hmm.
In that this is one of those situations where, you look down the line and there really isn't anyone out there apart from Topuria, right?
Yeah.
In terms of like a young, exciting talent who's, looks like guaranteed championship material, there just isn't anyone there.
Mm-hmm.
And the only ones who look like they could be are also on this card and are in, relatively tough fights. But yeah, as far as the finished product goes, that looks like he has a future, that has the ambitions of being, a massive star. Topuria's, talks about how he wants to be richer than Conor McGregor and various other things, and, obviously not going to happen, but he's it at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but that also, I think, does make this quite a good card, because it feels like there's a card where there's quite a lot hanging on it.
Absolutely.
A lot of the matchups feel a little weird, as you mentioned. These aren't exactly organically created, like Kai Kara France getting a title shot off exactly one win. The Topuria Oliveira fight, I'm not going to look down my nose at, but it's not, again, what everyone was expecting.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, Royval Van is, I think, a somewhat cruel matchup, but yeah, it's all exciting stuff, and yeah, there's genuine stakes behind it, kind of for the future of the UFC as well as the fighters themselves.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Now I will preface this by saying that we did miss last week, so correct me if I'm wrong, but the UFC does have one other star. You've forgotten about Jon Jones, Phil.
Oh, yes, of course.
You know, still to this day, one of the biggest stars in the UFC, a real marketable commodity. And,
Yeah.
you know, when do you think his next fight's going to be?
It's got to be soon, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's been so much back and forth between him and Aspinall that it's got to happen at some point.
I'm doing some cursory research here.
It's cool that we had. I'm actually feeling also quite refreshed.
Yeah.
Seeing as that we, because we didn't do anything MMA related in the gap between the episodes. So
yeah,
I feel like I'm really ready for this episode.
I don't want to rain on your parade. It does look like Jon Jones has self-scheduled a fight with two Albuquerque police officers. That's interesting. Yeah, that's the other bit of news that, I mean, we wouldn't have had time to talk about it last week anyway. It came out since that episode would have been published, but Jon Jones has retired. And as seems to be the case with every single announcement relating to Jon Jones, this has been coupled with the, apparently this event happened in like February. Or something like that. But he has also once again had some kind of insane traffic violation where he was with some woman who was not the mother of his children and his fiancée, who he's been engaged to for approximately 22 years now, and was threatening to to have the cops assassinated while making an incredibly intoxicated speaker phone call to the woman in question.
Yeah, it's Jon Jones. That's Jon Jones, all right.
It's just really good that they let him sort of sit on the title for like 2 years running, basically, with no meaningful challenges when they have another potentially very marketable star in Tom Aspinall, just, if not Jon Jones, then at least waiting for any number of title fights to take. It's just really an excellently managed business, it feels, when Tom Aspinall has now been on the shelf for ages, waiting for a fight with a guy who has probably had no real intention of fighting again this entire time.
Yeah, and it feels like these particular criminal charges coming out have precipitated this in some way. I mean, firstly, it was, I think that there were a couple things. A, they were like, he's actually getting close to being being the UFC's longest running heavyweight champion, I believe. At some point, which would have been
he already passed it in time.
Yeah. Also it feels like these charges kind of precipitated it in some way. That he might want to cover his. He might want to put this out into the world, put his retirement out into the world to cover up his newest embarrassment, but also that the UFC might have been like, oh, well, if it kind of seems like you might be going to jail, so there's no way you're going to be defending anytime soon, is there?
Yeah. Dana White made a deal with Jon Jones. He said, Jon, you retire, let the heavyweight division function. I will pay your legal fees, and in exchange, you burn those documents you have saying that I was on the Lolita Express. Which is the only thing that has forced my hand in allowing you to sit on top of the heavyweight division all this time with no fight in sight. So, happy ending. Everything came out as it should.
Yep. So I guess we say farewell to Jon Jones and, what is a very impressive legacy, albeit obviously an extremely weird and, somewhat tainted one.
Somewhat.
Yeah. It depends how much you value, PEDs being a disqualifier for this kind of thing. But he defended his belt for a long time against lots of people. And he was one of the most, sensational talents we've ever seen in the sport. And, we'll probably get to talk about him again when he does some kind of like influencer boxing freak fight.
Or something much, much worse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because notably he did say, I'm announcing my retirement from the UFC. He didn't say combat sports or MMA.
Yeah. Or crime, which is kind of what I was
Yeah,
referring
he's
to. I
never
mean,
retiring from
I
crime.
have a feeling the next time we talk about Jon Jones may be even worse than any kind of other combat sport. It may be something quite illegal. All right. Well, let's talk about Ilia Topuria and Charles Oliveira. That is the main event of UFC 317, and we can talk till we're blue in the face about how it's maybe not the fight everybody wanted, or even the fight that Topuria wanted. But it is the fight we have. It's hard to imagine it won't be a good, entertaining fight with some thrills and spills. So, what do you make of it?
I mean, from an MMA math perspective, I think the main thing you just got to ask yourself is something that people have been asking for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Is Ilia Topuria as good as Paddy Pimblett? Because Paddy Pimblett destroyed Michael Chandler. And Charles Oliveira only sort of mostly destroyed him.
Mm-hmm. Sort of mostly picked him apart until Chandler's rage bar had filled up enough to go ham on him in the 5th round.
Yep.
Yeah, it's not the setting aside the fact that it was now already, 7 months ago or whatever, and that it was preceded by a pretty straightforward loss to Arman Tsarukyan, who one wonders why he is not fighting for this title. I guess it's just because people know who Charles Oliveira is.
Mm-hmm.
It was not, it's not been a run of classic Charles Oliveira results or fights, has it?
No, certainly not in the, kill or die vein that we expect from him.
Yeah. So maybe we're already downgrading our expectations that this is going to be guaranteed action. I don't know. I mean, one thing you can say is that Topuria will make it an exciting fight one way or the other. That I have no doubt of. But I do have my doubts about where Charles Oliveira is at right now. He's 35 years old. He's been fighting since fighting professionally since, oh God, when was this? 2008?
Jesus.
A 46 fight career. At some point, it would seem only natural that he is going to start slowing down. Do you think his fight with Chandler, he was winning it the whole time. Were there any causes for concern that you saw from him before the disastrous 5th round?
I mean, it is hard to say, but I mean, just in terms of pure offensive potency and confidence, I mean, this was target practice for the most part.
Yeah.
This was, as we mentioned, one of the most defensively lackluster fighters, elite fighters in a good division that there is, who was basically on the back foot the entire time. And Charles Oliveira is one of the most offensively potent fighters that we've ever seen. He should have utterly thrashed him. And again, Paddy Pimblett did, in fact, utterly thrash Michael Chandler.
Largely on the feet, right? That's that's the most shocking thing, is that Paddy was beating his ass with his kickboxing game.
Yeah. So, I think Oliveira still looked like he was accurate, and he still looks big. But yeah, I did think he looked a little. I did think he just looked a little slow.
Yeah, same.
I mean, he's never been, to be honest, he's never been a very quick fighter, but, you know, he makes up for it by just, being big and having very clean, straight punching mechanics and being super dangerous in the clinch. So there's an incredibly, you know, small window in which you can effectively take advantage of him not being, you know, particularly fast. But yeah, I just thought he looked kind of slow.
Yeah, hand speed a little downgraded. Reaction times have never, defensively speaking, have never been a Chucky Olive's hallmark. But yeah, in every respect, I think I kind of agree. Had a harder time surprising Chandler on the feet than you would like to expect.
Yep.
And as for Ilia Topuria, I mean, there's a part of me that hates breaking down fights like this because you can't ignore the X factor of this being his first appointment at lightweight. And just wondering what effect that might have. You know, that it makes it harder just to evaluate him based on what we know of his game. Because if I could forget all that and say that this was a featherweight fight and Oliveira had been fighting at featherweight all this time, I'd be really, really, really confident in Topuria beating him.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still pretty damn confident, but it's an unfortunate wrinkle that might have some part to play in the fight.
Yeah, I think there were points in I think towards the end of the Holloway fight, I do think that Topuria was actually starting to look a little tired.
Yeah. And
he kind of, you know, forced his way through it and then had a burst of offense where he just finished Holloway off. I think there is a chance that if he gets stuck in there with like someone who's just big and physical, and at this point, I think Oliveira is a good deal bigger than Max Holloway.
Mm-hmm.
He's just filled out a lot more. They're approximately sort of the same height, but there's no way Charles Oliveira at this point could ever make featherweight again.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Holloway was, you know, relatively easily able to bounce back up and down. And so, yeah, I think there is a chance that he just gets slightly tired out by a physical fighter who can test him in the grappling. I don't know if it's a very good chance, I've got to be honest.
Yeah. I mean, one of the first things to consider here is the directionality of the fight. Mm-hmm. Topuria, I think, has shown some growth in the sense that he's a little better when he isn't just forcing somebody back the entire time than he used to be.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen that over the last 3 fights, I think, a little growth in that area. He's a little more defensively sound. His, he's always had like all of these great clean pivots and everything, but formerly they would kind of come as moves to follow up his own attacks. Come in with a 1, 2, 3 and then slip and pivot kind of Aldo style and reset and then go back on the attack. And now, we saw at a few points in that Holloway fight and at a few points going all the way back to the Emmett fight that he can actually, he can fight positionally reasonably well when he is the one going backwards. Mm-hmm. All of that being said, he is a pressure fighter. And I do wonder whether this version of Oliveira will concede pressure to Ilia Topuria. And if he does, I'm kind of expecting it. That's one reason to still call this pretty confidently for Topuria, I think. Oliveira off the back foot is not much, to be honest.
Yeah. My general feeling is that Oliveira is simply he's too slow to not have to concede. In at least some way. Because if you look at how Topuria fought Max Holloway, so much of it was him drawing out responses from Holloway and then countering them either like positionally or with strikes.
Mm-hmm.
So he'd be moving in behind his own jab, slipping the return, and then countering. And Holloway has a much better sense of when to move out of an engagement like that,
mm-hmm.
and distance control. Why he was able to beat Justin Gaethje, because he would just be able to glide back out of the way of what he felt were non-committal attacks, and then come back in and start his own offense when Gaethje actually missed.
Right.
And he's got a good sense of distance and how to move out of the way of things. And that is not really Oliveira, who is, mostly going to do, small head movements or just then move backwards. And he's going to rely on the fact that he can clinch up with people or simply punch them as his primary mode of defense. He's moving backwards, and then he will simply try and punch you as hard as possible.
Mm-hmm.
It's so difficult to see that level of craft not getting him into trouble.
Yeah.
It's this is like the thing with Topuria, is that when we talked about him fighting Volkanovski, and after he'd fought Volkanovski, and we talked about how he'd driven Volkanovski back into the cage and eventually destroyed him there. And it was just like, this will work even better against Max Holloway than it did Volkanovski, because he doesn't have the low kicks or the defensive cagecraft. And from the perspective of like Charles Oliveira, it just seems like that's even more so than Holloway. It's going to work really well on him. You're talking someone who doesn't move his head, who retreats on straight lines, and who relies on fairly sharp but committal counters on the way in to discourage you.
Yeah.
And if that doesn't happen, he needs to move backwards. And if you look at his first fight against Chandler, and partially I was looking at that because I wanted to see what the speed difference was in the two fights, and I think it is notable. He does look a good deal quicker in that first Chandler fight.
Some impressive hand speed in the exchanges in that first fight, right?
Yeah. But also, when he gets knocked down, it is because he concedes space to Chandler and backs up to the cage, and then is immediately like badly knocked down and badly hurt.
Yeah.
And Topuria shreds people by the cage.
Yep.
Like, more so than anyone we've seen as a striker, except for maybe Conor McGregor. If you have your back to the cage against him, he is going to kill you.
Yeah. And more consistently over the course of the fight than Conor McGregor. Maybe not as devastating in that first flush, but more flexible, more consistent. Yeah. He also has something which used to be a weakness of Oliveira's, which it occurs to me has not really been exploited by many of the top guys at lightweight that he's been fighting for so long now.
Body shots?
Body shots. Yeah. Remember when Max Holloway fought Charles Oliveira and just fucking cooked him with like straight right hands to the body over and over, and then his body was destroyed and he essentially folded?
Yep.
Or
the Cub Swanson limb shot overhand. But yeah, I mean, that was a big part of what made Chandler's success work the first time as well, right? That was back when Chandler used to have good plans.
Yeah. Throw that right hand bomb to the body and then come upstairs with the overhand, And that is, as far as I can tell, still very much a part of Topuria's game.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm just not like. It seems like a bad matchup, honestly.
For Oliveira.
For Oliveira, I can't see stylistic ways in which he gets it done. I don't think we've seen, we haven't really seen Topuria tested that much in protracted clinch exchanges.
Yeah.
There's a chance he can get overpowered. There's always a chance that, it hits the mat and they get tangled up and Oliveira just finds something because that's just who he is. But Topuria has never looked even slightly in danger of that working on him.
Nope.
Topuria's has sort of benefited from fighting people who are largely going to box with him.
Yes.
And I do find myself wondering how he would fare with like a dedicated kicker. But I honestly don't think that's really Charles Oliveira at this point, and I don't think he has the pure foot speed to essentially be able to kick Topuria that much because he's either going to be stuck in punching combinations with him, and in which case I again suspect he's going to get pushed back and die. And so he's not really going to be able to work low kicks and a long range kicking game that much as someone who's going to be really determined to stay on the outside and kick with Topuria would be.
Topuria also looked pretty well schooled and prepared for the kicking game of Max Holloway. I don't know to what extent he expected that, but it was a reasonably kick heavy performance from Max, and I remember bringing it up at the time because the prior time that Topuria had faced a kicker, it was Jai Herbert who nearly knocked him out with a head kick. And Max managed to slow Topuria's roll, flicking out left high kicks and stuff. Clearly that fight was something that Max or his team had studied. But Topuria was, it maybe slowed his offensive roll a bit, but he was defensively sound. He was aware of those kicks, and he adjusted to them. Besides which, as you say, not really a super major part of Oliveira's game, and I don't expect it to be, in particular, a major part of his game if he is pushed back frequently, as I expect him to be in this fight. So, aside from the clinches, which we haven't really seen, there's a chance Topuria comes in, rolls under some shot, gets his head grabbed, and gets pulled into a knee, right? And the fact that Oliveira, being a naturally much bigger man who has shown an increasing interest in controlling fights with his wrestling, I think, over the last few years, that's also something that might be a surprise. I don't know how Topuria's wrestling defense holds up given those X factors, but it does have the flavor of a bad matchup for Oliveira, as you say.
Yeah.
And I do expect Topuria to be quite well prepared, as he tends to be.
Yeah. I honestly think we're looking at an early finish.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would like that not to be the case, as much as, the UFC is, clearly, needs Topuria to win. And, in some ways the sport probably needs Topuria to win. It would be awesome if Oliveira could pull this one out and reclaim his belt.
Sure.
Just one of the most calculably exciting fighters we've ever seen. But it just looks like a really tough one, and he fought a terrible version of this style archetype. Yeah. Literally in his last fight.
Especially
didn't look very good.
It would be especially sweet for Oliveira to win, because while the UFC has very recently demonstrated their ability to drop the bag, like when they had a guaranteed interesting story with Yair Rodriguez versus Diego Lopez, and they just decided to do Rodriguez Volkanovski 2 for no reason. Still, if Topuria loses this, they gotta do Topuria Pimblett, right?
I mean, they can do that if he wins it.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. They probably will, actually. That'll be Pimblett's title shot, and we'll get all the,
Sarukian who?
Yeah. Yeah, they're just gonna skip over Arman again, because Topuria, thirsts for Paddy Pimblett's Scouse blood. But, you know. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a little strange having Topuria in this division. It's a little strange having this be the fight that decides whether or not he will be champion, but I expect we will see him once more with a belt around his waist. And that can only be good for him, for us, and certainly for the UFC, who needs this man to hold a title right now more than ever. All right. Well, let's take our first break on that note. When we come back, there is another title fight on this card. In the co-main event, we have flyweight champion Alexandre Pantoja defending against Kai Kara-France. Later on, Brandon Royval versus Joshua Van. As was mentioned before, Peyton Talbott is attempting to come back from his upset loss to Raoni Barcelos against Felipe Lima. And maybe we'll even get a moment to mention Beneil Dariush versus Renato Moicano as well. All of that after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
Welcome back to Heavy Hands. We have the co-main event upon us now. Alexandre Pantoja versus Kai Kara-France. I'm pleased to see it took too long, as it always does, and in all likelihood it will be just before his horrible downfall. But I'm pleased to see, I think that the opinion on Alexandre Pantoja, which has been so unjustly negative for most of his flyweight title reign, seems to have reversed somewhat since that fight with Kai Asakura. People have come around from what I've seen online. And they now regard Pantoja as a likable badass who fights really hard and is still capable of dominant performances and impressive finishes, as well as incredibly dogged resilience against a string of difficult opponents. Which, that's how he should be thought of. Pantoja he's just one of those guys I just feel like everyone should have immense respect for. He has fought all of the toughest fighters in a division whose difficulty I think has long been underrated, despite the fact that it is not chock full of talent. It has always been a very choppy, pretty stacked, a dense division, dense with talent. And Pantoja has been fighting in it in the UFC going all the way back to 2017 now. And it's just nice to see him getting a little shine. And
yeah.
You know, I say it comes just before his downfall because that tends to be how hype goes. I don't know that Kai Kara-France will be his downfall. I think there are some reasonably straightforward paths to victory here for Pantoja, but we'll see. What do you think of it?
Yeah, I mean, but Pantoja is at this point, you know, he's a known quantity.
Yeah.
Albeit an impressive one. And Kai Kara-France feels like he should be a known quantity.
Yeah.
I just feel like I can never quite get my head around Kai Kara-France.
Yeah.
Like what exactly it makes him tick at this weight class.
Mm-hmm.
because he's a good striker. He is he can be he can establish exchanges and work off his jab, and he's well schooled. He can close distance. You don't want to just rely on being able to back away against him. He's got a sort of series of relatively well-considered blitzes. He's not super durable. He hits a bit harder than you'd expect.
It's quite hard. Yeah. He's got good defense, surprising counters, big power. He is, even by the standards of flyweight, quite small. Yep. Especially by the standards of flyweight today. Although he probably won't look tiny against Pantoja, who's he's a thick flyweight, but not a gigantic one like Steve Erceg. Not incredibly durable. I don't know. Yeah, what is the book on Kai Kara-France? He's, I think the other thing is too that he's, I think his confidence fluctuates as well. Mm-hmm. Which is an interesting thing to have in a guy whose primary approach to fighting is counterpunching. You would expect that kind of guy to be very, very cool under pressure. But he's not always that way. That loss to Amir Albazi, for example, has not aged particularly well. Yeah.
There's obviously some caveats in that he probably didn't deserve to lose it, but it was still very close.
Yeah.
And Albazi looked particularly ring-rusted and, frankly, not that well the next time he came back after his neck surgery or whatever it was.
Yeah.
But even then, you're still looking at someone where it feels like his, it feels like his best performances have come from sudden bursts of offense that his opponents aren't necessarily prepared for.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's at the end of the fight later on in the fight against Askar Askarov, or whether it's early on against Steve Erceg. Steve Erceg's just I'm going to do the backing away with my chin in the air thing, and then Kara-France just lunged after him and decked him.
Yeah, did it about 5 times before Kai made the appropriate adjustment to throw a punch away and leap after him with the second layer. There's a bit of, Petr Yan, I think, in Kai Kara-France.
Yeah. 100%.
Without all the breadth of skill. He's one part of Petr Yan's game, just the boxing.
Yep.
But, it says something about why he is effective when he's effective. That he's got pretty tight defense, he can counter and punch in the pocket, and when it's necessary, he's also perfectly willing to just fly at you with a ludicrously overthrown punch that you don't expect to actually land because he's a tiny man who's very far away when the punch starts. But there's not a lot of breadth. And while there is some flexibility, he showed some flexibility in adjusting his distance and his timing there against Steve Erceg. He was also given a relatively blank canvas to work with. Erceg himself had not really gotten rolling at that point, and he also kept showing the same defensive opening again and again every time Kara-France attacked him. And then you compare that to a fight with a guy like Amir Albazi, who's pretty slow-footed, has a jab, but is not particularly high output. A guy who's just kind of meat and potatoes solid at his best.
Mm-hmm.
And Kai was not able to build much against him. So I think you're right that it's a surprising moment of offense is usually responsible for a Kai Kara-France win. And in the absence of that definitive moment, I think the best fighters in the division tend to beat him quite convincingly.
Yeah. And I feel like that that sort of confidence factor is also works the other way. I think he does very well against people when he can spook them.
Yeah.
You know, there's a sudden burst that he kind of throws.
Right.
And you know, he hits them with a flurry and they're like, "Oh, what was that?" And yeah, people who have just solidly sat there and worked through it, or just, you know, been unshakable because they have unbreakable chins like Brandon Moreno.
Yeah.
Or Brandon Royval for that matter.
Yeah.
Have simply been able to bury him essentially.
Yeah, and I think Albazi
also
fits that description a bit too. Like, at least at that time,
Yeah.
he was didn't fight an amazing
Unflappable.
fight, unflappable, exactly. And that is certainly the book on Pantoja.
Yes.
He is maybe the most unflappable man in the UFC, next to maybe like Dricus du Plessis. Things can be going horribly wrong, and he will still be trying to claw victory from the jaws of defeat. Even if it means making the fight a horrible grind, which has been responsible for a lot of people's low opinion of him in these title defenses. It's still something he's willing to do, completely exhausted, you know, maybe down on the cards, in trouble, whatever. He will just keep grinding.
Mm-hmm.
And that alone seems like reason enough to pick him over Kai Kara-France, if you ask me.
Yeah. I think Kara-France is going to pick up some nasty counterpunches on Pantoja. There's always,
Doubtless.
you know, the chance that Pantoja's chin goes at some point, because he does, you know.
Mm-hmm.
The difference between him and, say, Albazi is that while he's obviously better than Albazi did not, like, put himself into the line of fire as much as Pantoja will. Pantoja will simply, like, lunge forward, pumping out left-right punches. And at some point, there's a solid chance that, like, Kai Kara-France will just hit him as hard as he can, which is, as we mentioned, like, quite hard.
Yeah.
But, as we've also mentioned, Pantoja's chin has never been really dented that badly.
No.
Let alone cracked. Also, Kara-France is, but on the other hand, like, considering other dynamics, Kara-France is a good scrambler, but he does have a tendency to turn his back and try to escape from wrestling exchanges. And I do think that Pantoja will just hop on his back.
Yeah.
That basically I think it was the Askarov fight where Kara-France was able to sort of scramble out of those positions, and eventually the scrambling tired Askarov out enough that Kara-France started beating him up. I don't think that's going to happen against Pantoja. I don't think you want to be scrambling out of his back control, and I don't think it will tire him out as much as it will. It will tire him out. This is the thing with Pantoja, is that I think also makes it harder for people to really get behind his fights, is that, you know...
Yeah.
You know, he's not Khabib out there where he's just crushing the opponent and they look like, you know, they can't get away from his grappling. He looks fucking knackered, like, late into the second round of the fight, and simply pushes through every time.
Yeah.
They will both be tired, and I think that is another sort of secret weapon of Kara-France, is that he has very good cardio. But again, I think he's just going to be giving up his back too much in grappling exchanges.
Yeah. Well, and again, that gets at a fundamental difference between them, is that, like, Kai Kara-France gets a moment of stunning offense and wins. If he can't get that moment of stunning offense, he will lose.
Mm-hmm.
Pantoja gets a moment of stunning offense and wins impressively. If he can't get that moment of stunning offense, he'll win boringly. You know, like, that's a major difference between them. Is that, yeah, we know Pantoja's a guy who is a fucking wizard of a back taker. I mean, that whole back take sequence against Asakura, he, like, forces him to the fence. He eats a right hand, then lands a left hook anyway, goes in for a double leg, ends up getting dragged up to the clinch, and he hits like a foot sweep, which only off balances Asakura. It's not a full takedown, but he is instantly on his back. Asakura manages to stand, but Pantoja keeps like one of his hooks, and then the moment there's a tiny gap, he just fully jumps onto his back from a standing position. He is one of the best back takers in the UFC today. And
yep.
Yeah, Kai Kara-France is a good scrambler. All good scramblers give their backs. Like, that's how you scramble, you know? Like, that's a major part of the basic MMA scrambling toolkit is giving your back immediately and then adjusting. As long as you keep movement going, you keep the flow happening, you don't succumb. But Pantoja is uniquely good at seizing that first opportunity when all of his scrambling opponents give up their back. Even when that's like as skilled a grappler as Brandon Moreno, whom Pantoja is just like poison for Brandon Moreno. He has beaten him literally every time they've ever faced each other. And that's been 3-4 times, including the tough fight?
Yeah.
3 at least.
Yeah, you might be right. Yeah, I think it's 3.
So yeah, Kai Kara-France is going to land some big punches, but I think he's also going to allow himself to get put against the fence. He's probably going to throw really hard on one of those counters so that he's not in great position to stop a wrestling attack, and he's going to show some great scrambling, which nevertheless allows Pantoja to teleport to his back. And yeah, I think the question is really if Kai Kara-France can survive those first 2 rounds, when I'm expecting a lot of this hairy grappling to happen to him, then maybe he can make something happen. Maybe it'll be like, you know, the Steve Erceg fight where he kind of just catches Pantoja's timing more and more. Pantoja gets really tired, and maybe Kara-France is the guy to really, really hurt him. But
yeah. As I said, I think there is a possibility that he can broadly replicate some combination of the Erceg fight and his own fight with Askar Askarov. Said like Pantoja he's not getting hurt, but he's riding the razor's edge of how tired he could possibly get.
Oh yeah,
and it's willpower that's dragging him through.
Yeah.
And yeah, that is, I think, the secret sauce that makes Kai Kara-France work as a fighter, but I think it just feels like there's too much working against him here.
Yeah, I agree. So it looks like Pantoja is the mutual pick. And looks like it's also time for our final break, after which we will be talking about Brandon Royval versus Joshua Van, and Peyton Talbott versus Felipe Lima, and maybe a brief mention of 1 or 2 more. Maybe not. We're definitely going to hit those 2. The UFC's 2, almost their only 2, young, bright prospects after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are 1 or 2 of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
Welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are going to talk about some flyweights here. Joshua Van, who just recently had what I called at the time his best, most mature performance yet against little Bruno Silva, not the big depressed one, but the little flyweight puncher, has now stepped up on short notice to take on Brandon Royval in the 3rd fight down on this UFC 317 card. And, well, I'll let you take it away, Phil, because you were the one who told me about this fight a few weeks ago when it was announced in order to rain on my parade about how well Joshua Van might be brought along.
Yeah. I think this is probably as I said at the time, this is probably the worst matchup they could give him in the division, right?
Well, why do you say that? I'm still not 100% sure, actually, about this one.
Sorry, what's he going to do to Brandon Royval? I know I'm setting myself up to look dumb here.
Yeah.
Obviously.
Please, be more confident. No self-reflection.
Brandon Royval and just, his sloppy footwork is going to get exposed. He's going to crush him on the inside and so on and so forth. But, Van has obviously developed into, is continuing to develop into, a really dangerous pocket boxer who's got, a shocking level of craft. He's getting much more... he's got a much higher level of composure. He's not chasing the finish, all this other kind of stuff you would want to see from him. And I don't think that these are particularly skill sets that are going to work that well against Brandon Royval, who is going to throw an absolute ton of offense at him from the outside. It's like Robbie Lawler, right?
Mm-hmm.
Robbie Lawler, a genuinely great fighter. If he came up against someone who was a high-paced outside fighter, I was just he's just not beating these guys.
Yeah, I mean, he did beat Carlos Condit quite controversially, but that is still an example of the kind of fight you would expect him to have against a rangy, high-output guy, right?
Yeah, and he really.
Yeah.
I gave it to him at the time because I liked him more, but in retrospect, he really doesn't win that fight. He doesn't hurt Condit bad enough in his rounds that he wins to justify the whatever 100 strike differential that Condit had on him.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, looking back at, for example, Van's fight with Johnson. By the way, I don't know if you saw this, but as soon as I saw Charles Johnson posting on Twitter when he heard about Joshua Van getting this fight, and all he said was deserved and fire emojis, and it's so nice to see someone just to see an MMA fighter, because they're always so prickly about their own what they've accomplished. Not someone being not just being this guy that I beat is somehow leapfrogged me, or and not doing any kind of backhanded thing about Joshua. He's just yeah, you go for it.
Yeah.
Didn't nothing snarky. He's just great.
That's nice.
But yeah. But
there probably is still. I always suspect when fighters are supportive like that, there is some kind of self-validation in it as well. You're
yeah.
This guy that I beat. Fighters will often take the guy who either they beat narrowly or who beat them and pick them against future prospective opponent. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
To be well, obviously the guy who beat me is going to win this fight because he beat me. Maybe there's a bit of that to it, but it's a nice sentiment. Yeah, supporting Joshua.
And he didn't mention anything about how he'd already beaten him himself. He was just
yeah,
it's going to be great. But, one of the things that he did is that he's big and tall and rangy, and he just stuck offense out there, and Van kept trying to navigate slowly navigate his way inside it to get to the pocket.
Yeah.
And just couldn't, and found himself getting progressively more behind in a, very, let's say, Robbie Lawler versus... I think it was Babalu Sobral is one of the ones I'm thinking of, but also, what's his face? Really quick guy who also beat up Lorenz Larkin. These kind of people.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But yeah, he just couldn't find that slice at which his craft is really gonna function.
Mm-hmm.
Until it was too late. And I don't see why this doesn't happen against Brandon Royval, a Brandon Royval who throws even more and is even more determined to stay at that kind of distance. Brandon Royval who has Never been finished by strikes.
Mm-hmm.
It's never I don't even remember him looking super badly hurt by strikes.
He got
against
dropped
Pantoja.
by Kaikar France and just bounced back up.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's been hurt a few times, but tends to be very determined. Granted, this is there are kind of two Brandon Royvals, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's been high output the whole time, but this is leaf blower Brandon Royval now.
Yeah.
I do wonder how much that might change things here. I mean, your point is well taken. Like, Van also had a fairly difficult time with Edgar Chairez, at least for up to a point, until he managed to find Chairez's body and then just started hunting him. But another rangy, straight puncher who frustrated him pretty successfully early on. But I do wonder, I mean, I don't know, like, I'm not fully sold on, I don't find a lot of Brandon Royval's recent performances super convincing. You know, maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm tricking myself. Likely I am. But, for example, that fight with Brandon Moreno, it's like, how much of that is just, how much can we attribute the terrible decisions Moreno made and the apparently awful strategy and hideous punching? How much of that can we attribute to the frustrating elements of Royval's game? And how much of it is just Brandon Moreno being who he is and being inconsistent in that way?
Mm-hmm.
'Cause it's notable as a fight where Brandon Royval, like, sends a Max Holloway level of punches out there with a Matt Riddle level of accuracy.
Yep.
You know, it is a lot of bullshit in his new Holly Holm inspired approach.
Yeah, but I'm not sure that Joshua Van is not going to try and sit there and think, you know, what's he actually doing?
Yeah.
You know, what's this guy setting up? What's he really trying? I'm going to figure out what he's doing. I'm just going to take some time to figure out this stuff that he's doing. Oh, it's at the 14-minute mark.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm down 2 rounds.
Yeah.
Because that is the classic way to get someone who is a thoughtful craftsman type, who like gets absorbed in, you know, the intricacies of the pocket and so on. So you just give them endless dumb stuff to think about.
It's true.
Again, it always worked super well on Royval.
Yeah.
I am worried that it will work very well on Joshua Van.
Yeah. I think I'm siding with you. I would really like to hope. I mean, the thing is I do think that performance Van had against Bruno Silva was indicative of some serious growth. Silva is a dangerous fighter who is like never fully out of a fight, and the kind of guy I think that a previous version of Joshua Van would have gotten badly hurt by him at some point at least. And it was a patient but still insistent pressure performance from Van, where he was using his feints and his positioning to draw openings out of Bruno Silva. He was countering always in combination, and there was a lot of flexibility in how he put his shots together down the stretch. He kept it real simple, but never ran out of ideas. You know, and that's, it did feel a bit like Topuria versus Josh Emmett. That kind of, oh, okay. This guy's been obviously very good and dangerous and exciting, talented this whole time, but that was a guy who's going to go out there and win rounds off of good opponents.
Yeah, but it is also a fight
of
someone who is the perfect stylistic matchup for someone
Yes.
like Joshua Van.
Yeah.
Like an unstructured brawler with good instincts.
Yeah.
Someone who is very figure-outable.
And someone who
Whereas
has...
he has against someone like Brandon Royval, you simply cannot try to figure him out. You simply need to crush him.
Yeah.
Like, you cannot allow him to sit there throwing, 20 jabs at the space just in front of your head.
Mm-hmm.
You have to simply get in there and clock him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Silva, not only a great style matchup, bears very little resemblance to the difficult style matchups we know that Van has had with more than one rangy, tall opponent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's one of the reasons why I don't like this. I don't like this booking. I think it's like Yair Rodriguez against a Patricio Pitbull. It's one of these things where you're just like, let's give this person the matchup where they're likely to look the worst.
Yeah.
And it's like, do you not feel like your organization needs some kind of fresh, interesting blood at this point?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, do you really want to bounce, your Joshua Vans and your Patricio Pitbulls as far down the rankings as you possibly can with their most underwhelming fights? Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know that you want to.
I mean, what would you like to see supposing they want to give Joshua Van a push after that last performance, test him once again? What would be a more appropriate test? Somebody like Steve Erceg, maybe Steve Erceg at this point, since they've already
Perez. I would like to see Tim Elliott, because this is a rangy, annoying fighter with a unique style, who is a good wrestler, genuinely threatening, and is also like an annoying range threat kind of thing. He's just going to throw a bunch of strikes.
Mm-hmm.
He is on the feet, he is a much lighter version, a much gentler version of the Royval test, but he's also test the grappling without being someone who's likely to do serious damage to Van, even if he wins. So I would say Tim Elliott.
Yeah.
You could also just, you could just do Kai Asakura.
I was going to say, maybe Kai Asakura coming off his loss to Pantoja as a rangy striker, one who's a little more inclined to counterpunch than the other guys, but, it's not like Van has never walked into some big counters.
Yep.
Could be an interesting matchup. Yeah, I suppose the silver lining is that Joshua Van has already had a tough loss in his UFC career, has bounced back and gotten better, and is still so young that as long as they don't Steve Erceg his ass and literally just fling him into a title shot, he probably has enough time to continue improving in response to further losses. So it doesn't feel like the end of the world giving Joshua Van this fight.
I feel like this is essentially very similar to throwing him in for a title shot. As I said, I can't really think of matchups in this division where I would be, which I think would be worse for him, in all honesty.
I mean, Manel Kopp might be a very dangerous matchup to give him, right?
Yeah, very true.
At least Royval hasn't been hurting people.
Yeah, well, I guess so.
For quite some time. It's likely to be a somewhat bloodless loss if he loses the way Royval has been beating opponents lately. We'll see. Let's talk about the UFC's other. I suppose there is Raul Rosas Jr. is out there, who does seem to be improving.
Yeah. You're right.
You know what?
He
seemed incredibly overhyped, but super ambitious and confident. He took a hard loss, and I think he has finally shown some signs that he is developing a real MMA game, and he is still very, very young. But aside from him, really the only other bright, shining prospect in the UFC now is Peyton Talbott. I suppose maybe you could say the same about Felipe Lima. I'm actually not sure how old he is, but I think he's pretty young. Maybe I'm wrong about that.
I don't think he is.
He's 27.
Okay, that's pretty young for the UFC, for the modern UFC.
For the current standards, he is quite young, and he, of course, had that shocking UFC debut where he stepped in on, I think it was like a day's notice or something, to fight Muhammad Naimov, and lost 2 rounds, and then said, fuck it, and did what every fighter likes to think they would do, went completely apeshit in the 3rd round and managed to win. Followed that up with an impressive win over Miles Johns. If anything, seems like possibly too tough of an opponent to give Peyton Talbott after that really quite lopsided loss to Raoni Barcelos.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I would have co-signed that if I was Peyton Talbott's manager. I might have asked for a significant step back in this division. Yeah.
I mean, he's not quite like Raoni Barcelos in that he doesn't have Barcelos' level of technical acumen in all phases. But he's just really tough and violent.
Yeah. And in Barcelos, there was at least some balancing factor. I mean, that was such a win of experience over inexperience. Like Barcelos doubled down on that with his last fight over Cody Garbrandt. Just showing losing a step physically, but still an incredibly crafty veteran fighter, and found a hole in Peyton Talbott's game. Felipe Lima doesn't have that craft, but he is the exact opposite of Barcelos as a physical specimen. He's a young man who is a phenomenal athlete, like in his prime, basically. And who has already been proven against some pretty good UFC bantamweights, basically both of whom are better than anyone that Peyton Talbott has yet beaten. So,
yeah, what does Peyton Talbott's people he's beaten look like? I can't even.
Cameron Simon,
I guess,
who is, as Zane Simon would say, what Dricus du Plessis would look like without any athleticism.
Yep. Mine.
Yeah. And otherwise, they've just kind of been mostly cans, to be honest. And then he went in there, and he looked the way you'd want him to look against cans. He was shredding them. And just his talent just jumps off the screen. Like, it's very obvious he is operating at a different speed of reaction time and decision making and actual physical speed than any of these opponents. You know, it's clear that he's very good, but simply being innately very good was nowhere near enough to stop Raoni Barcelos from just exploiting the massive gaps in his knowledge. And I don't know. Yeah, I gotta say, I don't think this is a particularly good booking for Peyton Talbott. It just seems far too risky with, maybe they think Lima's got just as much upside and they're seeing this as a prospect versus prospect fight, but Peyton Talbott just had his first loss. I would really like to see him being given another, veteran like Raoni Barcelos to kind of get his confidence back and prove that he's capable of learning beyond what he already has.
Yeah. I don't have a strong read on this one. The people Lima has been fighting have not, like Naimov to an extent, have not really looked like the kind of sharpshooter that Talbot is or can be.
Not Naimov either.
And he can. And Lima does sort of work in takedowns into his striking, but it's not something that he's super comfortable at or good at setting up. Yeah, it is one of those ones that I think I would just instinctively pick Talbot in. Yeah. I think he's just going to be able to land a bunch of counters on Lima. But yeah, like Lima's he's just a tough, violent guy.
Yeah.
Who is just always there and always looking to throw back. And, you know, you can sort of just never underestimate how effective that is, really. You know, just being a sort of Rick Story type person who's going to have a hard fight with literally everyone.
Yeah, exactly. Because like where Peyton Talbott is right, you know, the downside of him just pulling apart all of his opponents piece by piece. Like the other young guy the UFC has now that I'm sure they're really looking forward to pushing is Wellmaker.
Yeah.
And he is absolutely gunning for a loss like Peyton Talbott suffered to Hani Barcelos, right? Because that is a young man who has no notion that there, no matter how many old guys in his gym and coaches tell him, he won't know till he finds out for himself that there are going to be opponents that he cannot finish. And he is going to lose when he runs into one of those opponents, whether it's just because of crude toughness or because they have a clever way like Hani Barcelos did against Talbott of working around his game and preventing him from getting the finishing offense off. He is gunning for that kind of loss. And Peyton Talbott's already had it. I think it's still a very big question whether he will go into a fight having corrected that misapprehension. And Felipe Lima has fought some good experienced fighters even before his two quite impressive UFC wins. He has demonstrated toughness and resourcefulness. He can get overwhelmed with shots, let a shot get through, and put up his defense, move his head, fire back. He has been battle-tested in a way that basically none of the people Peyton Talbott has beaten have. And simply by being still there in say, a third round, still firing back because it's the only way he knows how to respond to somebody building up a lead on him, I don't know how Peyton Talbott handles that. I'm with you in that I look at Peyton Talbott's striking, his fucking unbelievable ability to connect strikes together, to connect them to his defense, that remarkable flow that he can get into. And I say, yeah, Lima's going to like send out a jab and like instinctively duck, and Peyton Talbott is going to uppercut his head off. But will that actually finish Felipe Lima? And if it doesn't, how chaotic can the fight get before Lima actually has a real chance of winning it? I don't know.
Yeah.
That's why it's a dangerous matchup. You know, like there was still a chance that Peyton Talbott could have taken Hani Barcelos' head off if he had gotten a good shot in late, but I don't know how likely that looks. This is not Cameron Simon. This is a fighter on another physical level who is still young and in his prime and has never been knocked out.
Yep.
So yeah, I'm taking Talbott because I think Talbott is that kind of striking talent, and I certainly don't think that Lima, though he likes to wrestle and grapple, he likes to play his whole game, I don't think he's got the craft as a takedown artist that Barcelos does. But he's shown he can be in a really bad spot and just go fucking ham trying to win, and and can stand up to some punishment. So I think it's a very risky matchup to give Talbott just after his first loss.
Yeah. I might actually pick Lima, you know, just because Talbot was really tired at the end of that fight. That is one of the things you want. One of the things you want from a young fighter against an old fighter.
Yeah.
You want them to be on the winning end of the cardio equation at the end of a tough fight. And he wasn't.
Yep.
And
whereas Lima, on no notice at all, spent 2 rounds getting badly out-wrestled by Muhammad Naimov and still had all the stamina in the world to go out there and finish him.
Yeah. But it's just a physical tough fight. If he can make it a physical tough fight, he might just be able to, drive Talbot out of the fight. Yeah.
I think it's a very realistic possibility. Yeah. And it's not just toughness. Like, I'm not saying he's not an amazing defensive fighter, but like Lima has a feel for exchanges. He knows when to put his guard up. He knows when to slip. I do think Talbot is operating on another level in terms of reading those kinds of openings, but he's also been reading those openings against people he has absolutely no reason to fear or respect.
Yes.
And
there's a lot less stress involved when someone isn't trying to, when someone isn't actively reading everything you throw at them and always throwing something back at you.
There's like a built-in initiative in all of Talbott's pre-Barcelos fights, right? Every moment, even when he's fully reacting, he's just operating on a higher level of speed and awareness than his opponents. And he won't have that cushion against Lima. So it is what it is. I'm very curious to see it. And we'll see if the UFC squanders one of their most promising prospects, arguably that they've ever had. I mean, Peyton Talbott does look like that special of a fighter, and maybe that's why they're giving him this vote of confidence, or maybe they just don't know or care that much about matchmaking, which does seem to kind of be the case these days.
I mean, always.
Yeah. True.
Remember Max Holloway.
Yeah, that's true. I guess we're going to find out if Peyton Talbott is that kind of good. All right. Well, I think that'll do it for this week's episode of Heavy Hands. I want to thank you all again for sticking with us on the unexpected absence of an episode last week, but everything seems to be in perfect working order. So we'll be back next week to talk about whatever the hell happens at UFC 317. Anything on the horizon after that? Looks like we get a week off, actually.
Yay.
So we get to just focus on the good fights, and then we have to talk about Derek Lewis. But you know what? They've actually kind of tried with this card, too. Nate Landwehr, Morgan Charrier, Calvin Kattar, Steve Garcia, Stephen Thompson, Gabriel Bonfim continuing the welterweight turnover attempts. I'm okay with a lot of these fights, actually. So we'll be back next week to talk about UFC 317. Make sure that you get at us on social media. You can find Phil on Twitter at Evil Greg Jackson. You can find me at Boxing Bush. You can also find me on Blue Sky at King Typo. And go check out the Heavy Hands Patreon. We should have some bonus content for you. And until next week, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.